because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today, for the sake of science, we're dropping acid and suspending ourselves in sensory deprivation tanks. That can only mean that the film we're talking about is Ken Russell's Altered States.
In the basement of one of the country's leading medical schools, Dr. Edward Jessup, candidate for a Nobel Prize, is conducting the most dangerous experiment in the history of science. And the subject of the experiment is himself.
Ask him what kind of an experience I can expect. The noise is deafening.
He's blacked out.
What happens during these blackout periods is you get the feeling of phenomenal acceleration, like you're being shot out over millions, billions of years. Time simply obliterates.
You guys are shooting up with an untested drug that stacks up in the brain and works in the nucleus of the cell, and you don't call that dangerous.
Now, I'm asking you to put the experiment off until we understand a little more in order to minimize the risk.
Way.
I'm really frightened.
And joining us today are Aaron and Carly from the hit podcast Hit Factory, a show about the films and politics of the 1990s. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thrilled to be here.
I'm high as shit right now.
I think that is the best way to watch and or discuss this movie, so I think we're doing right. We're doing it right. All right, I want to ask you guys, had you seen the movie before? And if so or if not, what did you think of it this time?
First time for me, actually, with Altered States. I guess you could call me a casual Ken Russell fan. I know at some point...
Is that possible? Can you casually be into Ken Russell?
Maybe. I mean, insofar as that, like, I've only seen a couple of his films. I know that at one point in time in college, inebriated, I watched Tommy with some friends. And it was within the last handful of years, definitely in the COVID era at some point, that I finally watched his film The Devils.
Right.
Which I think
that came out recently on Criterion. It was like unavailable for a long time, and then they had it on Shudder, I think, and then Criterion had it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting case because it's so banned that, like, even the version that winds up on like Shudder or Criterion is sometimes like heavily letterboxed. Like it's like a widescreen format on a like 3/4 format VHS tape that then gets put up. But
wow.
if you search hard enough, you can find a 1080p upscale version of the film on the internet, thanks to some cinephiles out there, which I did check out and loved. But that was it up until this one. And watching this, I was incredibly impressed. I know that, this conversation about this film came up a lot with the passing of star William Hurt in the past couple of years. And yeah, what a trip. It has all of those kind of like characteristic Ken Russell visuals.
Yeah.
The psychedelia in there. But I don't know. It's wild. We were watching it. I watched it all last night. I know Carly caught up with some of it earlier today and finished it up. And we were in separate places, and she was messaging me, and she said, "This movie is insane," with lots of exclamation points. And all I could really think to say back was, "No, it's insane," in all caps with a couple of exclamation points.
Yeah.
So that's my take on Altered States.
Yeah. Carly, what was your... So you watched it today. You're like fresh.
I finished it today.
Okay.
I started it last night and finished it today. Yeah, so I don't think I've ever seen a Ken Russell movie. I feel like if I had, I would know. And I had never seen this film accordingly. And all I can think about when I see William Hurt is broadcast news, which I feel like made this experience so much better and cooler and interesting. Like, I just like loved seeing him in this role, and just like found his presence in the film like remarkable. And to the question of like, did I like it? I like loved it, and I also found it like incredibly antagonistic. Like, I didn't like it at all. I was like very viscerally attracted to it and at the same time repulsed by it. And also just like had a blast. Like, the last third of the film is like totally nuts, and it's like kind of impossible to just be like, oh yeah, this is fine. You're like watching it and you're like, this is a movie and this is an experience, which like I have to applaud.
Totally. Yeah. Laura, I mean, so we saw it with a
bunch of academics.
Yeah, we saw it. Well, we see all of the movies we see tend to be with academics.
That's true.
Because that's
I guess to be like, we saw it with philosophers. This doesn't narrow things down.
But yeah, we saw it on like a really shitty TV, but then we rewatched it recently and on for this, and I mean, what do you think the second time? I didn't like it the first time, I have to say.
You didn't?
No, but I loved it the second time.
It didn't make an impression on me the first time, which I don't even know how that's possible. I was trying to remember, like, was I exhausted? Did I fall asleep? Like, I don't understand how this movie didn't like at least imprint itself into me, like whether or not I liked it the first time round. And then when I started watching, I was like, oh yeah, I remember some of these images, but I must have like, I don't know, fell asleep or something. I really loved it the second time round, particularly the first 2/3. When things are getting really trippy, I kind of zoned out a little bit, but the academic stuff was so fucking funny. I forgot that this movie's hilarious.
This movie is very funny.
It's so funny.
Did you guys read about the dispute between Ken Russell and Patty Chayefsky?
A little bit, but
not.
Not enough to be that well versed on it.
Enlighten us.
So this is relevant to sort of why the film, I think, is a little bit disjointed in some respects. So screenwriter of the film is Patty Chayefsky, who famously wrote Network and other. He was Academy Award winning screenwriter 3 times over, or maybe even 4 times over. Anyway, he wrote the script, and he was such a big name that he had basically final cut of the script, so they couldn't cut any lines. Every line had to be said, but Ken Russell found the dialogue pretentious and embarrassing and
long. If they said it at a normal pace, it'd be a 4-hour movie.
Yeah,
it'd be a long movie.
So he had all the actors say their lines really fast, and they would often talk over one another and while eating, and just push through the dialogue, because he was like, we need to try to figure out how to get this movie to make sense to people on some more visual, visceral level. And anyway, so I think that contributes to a little bit of like this stuff you're talking about, Laura, about the dialogue feeling. It actually ends up making it feel real, because these characters are like throwing away these lines that Chayefsky has honed. You could just see him like honing them, like crafting these soliloquies, and then they're just like spitting them out there like they're nothing almost. But that kind of feels there's a certain degree of verisimilitude because about that.
Yeah, it feels like a philosopher party. No.
Okay, so anyway, that I think that I find very interesting. The other thing that is interesting about this movie that I think is worth just highlighting at the beginning, we can come back to it at any point, is there is a through line with a lot of Ken Russell movies. So The Devils, most clearly, but which is horniness and religious insecurity. So all of his movies are horny, as far as I can tell. He's directed allegedly 86 movies, of which I've heard of 5. So, but the 5 that I've heard of are all pretty horny, and have a lot of this, like, he's feeling a little bit a little bit unhappy about how horny he is. And this central character of this film is grappling with his religious views. I'm just curious, where do you guys stand on like the 2 big things, like hallucinogens and God?
That's a big question.
I love that question.
Wow.
We are podcasting with philosophers.
Yes, this is getting right to the core of it.
So I think the way that this movie presents hallucinogens and sort of like psychedelic experiences as like understood through a Western sort of more like white European perspective and then an indigenous perspective is really important. And how I feel about hallucinogens is not necessarily like I don't have a specific opinion on it, but what this movie made me realize is that like there are so many similarities between the sort of like Icarian processes and like visions and aspirations in like the scientific method and just like projects that, you know, we do in the name of science and the empirical. And then like the same thing can be said for the rituals and processes that we do in the name of, you know, religious and like psychic experiences, like people in a cave somewhere drinking blood. And like this movie made me just like, I couldn't help but draw like very obvious parallels between those two. And I don't know that the film or Ken Russell or anyone else is necessarily moralizing one or the other to say like, well, this one is inherently good and this one is inherently bad. But just that there are forms of hallucinogens that like we would say are explicitly hallucinogens. And then there are other things that we do in the name of, you know, science or love or whatever that are also kind of hallucinogenic. Like the sexual experience at the beginning of the film is one that induces hallucinations for our protagonist. And so like how I feel about hallucinogens broadly is that I think there are ones that we would sort of classify in that category, and then others that, you know, we maybe use the same way, but would not necessarily call hallucinogenic. Does that make sense? I feel like that was a very roundabout argument, but I got there eventually.
You're more into like the sexual hallucinogens.
100%. Actually, like
right.
that's very on brand for me. But I also think there's something to be said about like, I don't know, the sort of like electric happenings that take place, you know, when you are in out of body and like also very entrenched bodily experiences that have to do with, you know, sex and pleasure and all of those things.
Yeah. I mean, do you guys, are you guys religious? Are either of you religious?
You have like more of a story there than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up pretty religious and then rejected that faith. I guess I could say I rejected God, not unlike Dr. Jessup in this movie. And then I had a period where I did lots of drugs, including hallucinogens. And now I don't do those anymore and have since come around on learning about and understanding a God as I see God. So it's a tricky question because I don't know that I would call myself religious or particularly devout in any sort of organized or like fundamentalist way. But I like the kind of core conceit here in the movie of an exploration of a connection to some sort of kind of primordial origin or like a sort of connecting fabric of existence that is sort of God and the understanding this film kind of paints God with. I also kind of like the conclusions that it arrives at.
Yeah. Well, so the reason I ask this is I feel like how you're oriented both spiritually and also your orientation potentially to hallucinogenic drugs may affect how you think about this movie and this character. So in particular, this is now I'm going to lead into our first segment, which is called Hinge Points, and it's brought to you by Charlton Heston and Planet of the Apes.
You maniac! You blew it up!
These are pivotal pivotal moments on which major aspects of the film turn. So you can think of Jessup, the character of Jessup, as having an arc very similar in some regards to the one that you yourself went on, Aaron. So, I mean, one of the things that he starts out the film he's early on. He's talking to Emily, his soon to be wife, and he tells her about the story of his father, of seeing his father die, and that's the moment he renounces God. So he, like you, he renounces God, but this is a crisis for him, because then he's lost in a way. He's now looking to find something to replace God with. And I think this sort of one other hinge point that's related to this is how it's not quite as explicit that this is what has, this exact thing in the movie has affected this, but, he's watching a schizophrenic get shot up with some kind of LSD or something. And he describes it and he says, the reason I care about studying schizophrenics is that they have religious experiences very similar to those described by people who have them. They have a kind of hallucinatory experience that's similar to the classic religious experience. And I'm interested in that. I want to get closer to that. So he's renounced God, but he's got to go find God. And so this leads him to go on this quest to the Hinchi tribe or whatever to take their drugs and so on, and then do the sensory deprivation stuff. But then in the end, he has this thing where it goes in the tank. I don't know exactly what happens, but apparently, according to the script, he is reduced to a cell or something. I don't know. And he's reduced to sort of nothingness. And it's the love of Emily that brings him back. And that, and the end of the film, which I feel like it's a little bit of a throwaway ending, but the end of the film is supposed to be that he's come to realize that this whole quest to find God is sort of not led to anything, and that where we are is just we just have each other. It's this kind of we're just with one another. And to my mind, you actually the thing you described, Aaron, sounds kind of like you've been on that very journey, almost the same journey as Jessup. I mean, does that ring true to you?
I would say absolutely, and I think that's why I enjoyed the film so much and found it resonant. I am a huge sucker for a love conquers all story done right, and not just a love conquers all, but actually a love is all there is at the furthest reaches of our existence. That God really is just the connections that we form with people. And I think that this one arrives there in a kind of labyrinthine, oddball, strange, sometimes upsetting way. Yeah. But I still found it moving. And, it's funny because we talked about, Chayefsky, kind of splitting hairs about how the direction was going and how the movie works. And it really is a movie that feels too busy for ultimately how simple its conclusion is. I actually really love that Russell strips a lot of that away by just crashing the dialogue into itself and having people talk over one another and kind of rushing through it so that you can meet it at a more cerebral and then eventually emotional level.
Yeah. Do you feel it succeeds in that emotional bit at the end where, they're sort of embrace and he says, he's saying a bunch of stuff, and Emily says, "I think you're trying to tell me you love me," which is, Laura and I've had that exact conversation. So many of the conversations in this film we've had where I'm ranting about something, and Laura's like, "You mean to just say you love me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I guess that's right." But I mean, does that ring? I kind of felt yes, it seems, but it's also felt so hyper intellectualized that I don't know. It didn't. I'm not sure if it hit as hard as it maybe was supposed to for me. I don't know. Carly, do you have thoughts on this?
I want to hear what Laura says first.
Okay, what do you...
No, I was just thinking about the time that you kind of proposed but didn't propose,
right.
4 years before we got married, where you just said,
I knew you had some tea, Laura. I knew it.
No, I mean, we were trying to figure out if we were going to go distance or I was going to move to the city that you needed to be in. And I was worried about healthcare. And you're like, well, we could just get married because I think that's a foregone conclusion, is what you said. And I was like, excuse me, what? That's the first time we've ever talked about it.
Yeah, I think we've been dating for 2 years.
Yeah.
It was a Jessup move.
Yeah, it was a real foregone conclusion. Yeah. I was like,
I love it.
But yeah, that's just how love is in this house.
Yep.
Your love language is spreadsheets.
It's true.
I mean, the end of the film fell totally flat for me. Like, I love it. I love the image of it. I love the message, but I did not like feel emotionally like connected to what was happening. But that didn't matter to me because I appreciated where the film landed, and I also appreciated that like it is at its core like a really simple story where it's kind of like, I mean, I don't want to compare it to Dante's Inferno because fucking everyone does that and not everything is Dante's Inferno. But I do feel like there is, you know, this core truth about humanity and religion and love that is like the thing that all of us are really searching for is just love.
Yeah.
And like, that's the thing that makes us do things, even when we think it's all this other stuff and we're like trying to figure out, you know, about like life beginning or hell or whatever. Like it's actually love that's driving us, or like the lack of it. But I mean, as you said, Justin, like the end is a little bit too tidy, right? But I was so, I think, stirred by the message and also just like the visuals. I mean, because it goes out with the bang. Like she's like lava or something at the end, and then like
it's pretty cool.
Then they're embracing and they're naked, and it's like very beautiful and sculptural. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah.
Kind of works. At risk of hijacking the episode a little bit, are you two or either of you fans of the films of James Gray?
What has he done?
So
I think
the fact that we paused really big is that we don't know what that is.
That's the answer, right? So
I only know him because of Aaron and his recent ventures.
He's an incredible filmmaker, one of the greats of contemporary American cinema, I would say. But he's got two films, one called The Lost City of Zed, based on the David Grann novel, and then another one that he followed with called Ad Astra that has
which I have seen, yes.
And for my money, he is one of the great chroniclers, and in those two films, very much a chronicler of just sort of a strain of masculinity that is this kind of thing, where it's like someone who is so driven by like an exceptional purpose or has some sort of idea of the grandness of existence and reality and a desire to know fundamental truths about ourselves that are sort of incapable of loving in a normal way, and then ultimately come to the conclusion that there's really nothing out there except for ourselves and what we can provide to one another. And so this movie does that pretty well, except that I almost wanted it to do it more. You know, it gets kind of lost in scenes of like a primate man running about in a zoo and eating gazelle, you know, and that's not interesting. It's really thrilling stuff to see. But it loses its way sometimes in just trying to go for like the big swing kind of stuff often, I think, and loses some of the texture at the human level that is there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. James Gray, by the way, Armageddon Time. Yeah, I liked Armageddon Time a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
You know, the other thing that I think it's worth mentioning here on this point is Jessup's whole thing is a solipsistic quest. So he tries to find God by immersing himself in a sensory deprivation tank where he's cut off from everyone else. He doesn't want to engage with anyone else. He wants to take hallucinogens and like go into his genetic memories, which he thinks is going to connect him back to some proto-human, you know, whatever, that kind of thing. But the whole time he has a bunch of supportive people around him. He's got not just Emily, his wife, he's got Arthur, his loyal friend, Bob Balaban, and he's got Mason Parrish. Actually, my sleeper hit, you know,
Mason's so
my
good.
favorite character.
Obsessed with him.
So good.
And you know, he has these people in his life. He also has kids, and it's interesting that the film wants to end with him forging a real connection finally with someone else in his life, rather than going inwards, doing this thing where he cuts himself off. And I think, to your point, Aaron and Carly both, that is, I think, the message of the film. I'm not sure if it comes across as totally clear, but it seems to be what Chayefsky's getting at. I think Ken Russell is actually really taken by the religious stuff, because I think Ken Russell is really anxious about the religious stuff. And so I think maybe this is just a point where the wires are getting a bit crossed. But anyway, to this, so let me just, we're in the segment called Hinge Points. Are there any other, are there any hinge points in the film that you guys want to highlight?
I can go just because it
Please.
dovetails quite well with what you were saying, Justin. Because maybe this is a very obvious one, but I was thinking about the moment when we do the time jump and we discover that Eddie and Emily are about to separate.
Yeah.
And he says,
it's like they've just gotten together, and then the
time
next
jump,
scene,
they're breaking
divorced.
up. And he says, Emily's content to go on with his life. She insists she's in love with me, whatever it is. But this means that she prefers the senseless pain we inflict on each other to the pain that we would otherwise inflict on ourselves. But I'm not afraid of that solitary pain. And if I don't strip myself of all this clutter and ridiculous ritual, I should go out of my fucking mind. And that's when he's like, I can't be in society. I can't be in a relationship. I'm not interested in like just going through the daily stuff and connecting with people. I'm going to look in the abyss. Like he's not afraid, he says, of that, of inflicting pain on himself and that solitary pain. In fact, he's obsessed by it and fascinated by it. And that's when they go separate ways. And she goes to Nairobi and he goes to Mexico. And that's really the beginning. He hasn't been fucking with sensory tanks for like this whole few years that he's been having kids.
I see.
Stuff.
So he's had a normal life.
He's tried to have a normal life, but it's not working for him. And I think that's the moment where he's just like, I'm going to go all the way and I will destroy myself to find the truth.
It's also interesting that Emily says that part of the reason she's attracted to him is his drive, as she says explicitly, to push back against the nihilistic dimensions of the universe, even despite the pain it causes him. So I think both of them together, like his drive for that, he sees it almost as a duty because he can, and she's attracted to him for that, for his, in a way, sacrifice to find that truth or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like the conversations that this film is having about like gender roles and just sort of like men and women and how they exist in the world and their relationships with like their pursuits, personal, professional, or otherwise, is something I really grafted onto. And along those lines, a hinge point for me is when Emily comes back from Nairobi, and like in terms of just like illusions being made, like she's in a full-on safari outfit right before he turns into an ape, which I was like, oh, I like that. But she comes back from Nairobi, she's like talking to him, and he's telling her about this intense experience that he had, and he's like, I think like something transformative happened. Like, I think something happened with my actual like genetic code. And he's like, he sounds like a schizophrenic. He sounds like one of the people that he has studied. And she's like listening to him and taking it all in. And she's just kind of like, okay, that's great. But like, why don't you do like X, Y, and Z? Like she's being really rational and at the same time, like doing the thing that she's always done with him, which is express interest and be curious in the things that he's curious about. And he doesn't care if she is or isn't. He's just talking. And she, and what I like about this particular exchange as like a hinge point is that like, it's a totally like nothing scene in terms of like, there are so many other scenes in the film that have more happening or have more sort of like expressive and like overwrought dialogue. This is like a very domestic scene between the two of them, and I feel like it encapsulates not just their characters really well, but also just kind of like relationships more broadly, and like men's ability to like go off and pursue these things that might be like irrational or insane or like whatever they may be. And that the female is, unpacking the house, and she's like putting things away, and she's like yeah, totally. Okay, that sounds great. What else do you want to tell me? Okay, well, like the kids need dinner, so
Yeah.
and it's very like I'm being reductive, but I just liked that scene because it felt kind of like, I don't know, it just felt weirdly sort of like domestic and evocative of their two like the places in their relationship that they each sit.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, also it shows that like he's afforded the opportunity to obsess about his research and go in deprivation tanks and take drugs that make him fucked up for 12 hours because she's handling all the domestic duties and raising their kids.
Yeah. She's doing her research, but she brings the kids.
Exactly.
Because somebody's got to bring the kids.
Exactly. She's actually a responsible adult, whereas he's fucking off and sleeping with students.
Yep. He even refers to that woman as a kid from one of my classes at a certain point before he like goes and sleeps with her, which is like, come on, man.
I also just love the literalization of him completely rejecting like anything remotely domestic or sort of like rudimentarily like, just like the day-to-day living under capitalism, and then he just like becomes an ape. Like
Absolutely.
like that.
He wants to regress to a time when he can fully embody the ape man, caveman ideal that like Jordan Peterson has told us we ought to, we ought to all regress to. So in that regard, maybe he, this whole quest to regress and then ultimately learning that when you regress, it actually sucks.
It's actually so lonely.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. I was bummed out he didn't get Chinese food with his kids.
They were looking forward to it.
They were. He meets them at Logan, which I guess it really was Logan. Which isn't that funny that you could just wave at somebody when they're coming out of like,
Well,
But anyway, that was back in the day. But I think maybe it's Drew Barrymore is like, and we're gonna get Chinese food, and he's like, yeah, totally. But instead, he rants at his wife for an hour, and she's like, you're screaming, and then he's like, ugh, and then he just like disappears, and she goes, and then you see later like she took the kids to dinner, and he went to go to the deprivation tank.
God.
I kind of love it.
It's a lot. I've got one more of these hinge points, I think, that was my favorite part of the film is when he goes to Mexico to go and see the indigenous tribe.
I loved that.
And before this, there are maybe suggestions that this man is, like you said, solipsistic or maybe a little misanthropic or just kind of a little bit, he walks the beat of his own drum in a way that's kind of frustrating, but you could kind of tack it up to like, him being a genius amongst mere mortals, and some of the film even kind of paints it that way a little bit. There are a couple of chinks in the armor, but when he goes down and visits this tribe with his guide, Echevarria, is when you finally kind of see like how kind of stupid he is, and it's really funny. Like he doesn't speak the language at all. He seems completely like averse to the actual ceremonial ritual. Like he gets his hand cut and then like freaks out and runs off to go get bandaged, and it's like, homie, you wanted this, like you signed up for, like they cut your finger open a little bit, like chill out. And the funniest part of the film is after he has his hallucinogenic journey, and then we kind of come out of it onto this very icky carcass of like a Komodo dragon, and we just see him walking away from like the mountain saying, we only have their word for it that I killed the lizard. like nobody saw it, we don't know for sure that it was basically like, this white boy that can't hang when he's on the drugs and like ended up fleeing the cave to go and murder a lizard.
And I love what feels like that when he kills a gazelle, it's almost like a callback. Like it's like this guy, whenever he gets shit-faced, like he's gonna kill an animal. Like, that guy in college, maybe you didn't know somebody who killed a Komodo, but like my friend, his thing was that whenever he got very drunk, he would just bring a chair home. Like if he saw it on the street, they were just, the dorm got filled with chairs over the course of the year.
Yeah.
But or at least like, there's that guy who's gonna do something messy or break something. You're just like, oh man, like he's gonna kill a lizard tonight. That's what he's gonna do.
Don't let him near the zoo.
I was utterly primal. I consisted of nothing more than the will to survive, to live through the night, to eat, to drink, to sleep. It was the most supremely satisfying time of my life.
Okay, so we have identified several different important hinge points of the film, but this is now taking us to an important time where we investigate the philosophical outlooks of our characters. It's the wise and the weariest.
I live my life a quarter mile at a time. Nothing else matters.
Which of these characters' philosophical outlooks do you resonate with you? I'm curious.
You're nodding to me to go
well,
first.
I've been talking so much.
Look, I think one of the reasons I am a sucker for these kinds of films is because I somewhat identify with these male characters, in that I can often, I think, find myself in the sort of spirals of my own obsessions, whether they are actually important or, completely superfluous, ridiculous things that I just wind up fixating on, and often they both feel equally big to me. And I think I like them because they're good reminders of the only fundamental truth that I have uncovered in my life, which is that other people make all of this bullshit worth it. And so I mean, I can't identify necessarily with Jessup at the beginning, or I wish I didn't, I guess is what I would say. I wish I didn't identify with Jessup at the beginning of this movie. And I am always pleased by the end when I'm like, aha, this person came to a similar conclusion as I did, and it's a good reminder for me. So that's my answer is, who we identify with, unfortunately, but also thankfully, Dr. Eddie Jessup.
Do you have a character whose philosophical outlook? I mean, resonating can mean many things. You don't necessarily have to identify. It could just mean it was provocative in a way that you found interesting. But I'm curious, Carly, which character's sort of philosophy resonated?
Definitely Emily. I think just not only her worldview and that she represents, love as the one truth that matters, but she's constantly slitting her wrists open for this man, and he's just doesn't care. And that's me. I'm oh my God, tell me all your hopes and dreams. I'll tell you mine. And everyone's just maybe. Okay. I guess you want to do that. Sometimes people meet me there. It's great. Sometimes they don't. It doesn't really matter. I just I am a person who cannot help but confess things to people. And so I totally align with that sort of mode of hers. But I also think it's representative of her philosophical outlook, which is that she says at the end, he does not find any truth in the transitory. And she asserts that she does in so many words, and I very much align with that. And she says something at the end that I felt summed up sort of her whole deal, and that I really, really connected with. She's in a state of shock, according to Mason, but she's the most lucid she's been through the entire film, as far as I'm concerned. And it's after this climax of Jessup going to a zoo and becoming early man and killing a goat, and they don't see any of it, but they see the aftermath. And she's experienced this second wave of him trying to recreate what happened, and sees explosions and lights and water and all of these things, and it shakes her. And she's sort of rattling off these things in her living room. And she's talking about how I was in Mexico, and, I was trying to fall in love with all these guys, and it was just painful because none of them were him. And she says, he's possessed me, in so many words, I'm possessed by him. And I love that turn of phrase from her, because he's never been possessed by her or anything other than his own pursuits.
Yeah.
And she is wholly, addicted to this man, taken by him, and wants desperately to be with him and to love him and for him to love her. And she, that's what ends up saving them. But I love that line, because I think the ability to allow yourself to be possessed by another human and to love someone as openly and defiantly and vulnerably as she does him is really beautiful.
Yeah, it's a kind of vulnerability he's unable to give to her until he sees the nothing. He like peers into the actual abyss and realizes that he has to, in which case it's a little bit less unselfish in the way that her love is for him. He realizes he needs her, whereas she loves him unequivocally. Laura, did you have a character that resonated with you?
I mean, it's Emily.
Yeah, but do you want to speak up for Arthur, maybe? I do.
You think I'm an Arthur?
I can see you being an Arthur.
I'm a total Arthur.
Yeah.
No, I just think I think Emily's got some really beautiful lines. And she's more, she talks quite a lot about her worldview. I mean, do you think just like Arthur just being like best friend, buddy number 2, second banana, never wants the limelight?
Yeah, you're willing to go to war for whoever you're backing up.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I do love a bossy boss. I love a bossy Virgo. That's why you and I work really well together. You're my bossy Virgo.
I mean, Arthur also is the conscience, the moral conscience of this group.
Right.
He's the one who's constantly talking about, saying that we have moral obligations to the public, and he's always concerned about Emily and in their relationship.
And he brought Emily and Eddie together too.
Yeah.
It's his party. He sort of orchestrates it in the
matchmaker.
beginning. Yeah. So you're like a Mason.
I am a Mason. So, I think of Mason as the skeptic. He's ultimately really the conservative. If you think of Jessup as the revolutionary, then Mason's the conservative. Jessup's the person who has found something that would revolutionize the scientific understanding as we know it. Whereas Mason much more embodies the true scientific spirit, which is fundamentally conservative, ultimately trying to explain everything within the existing paradigm until you get to a breaking point where you cannot.
Until you show that X-ray to a radiologist, and he's like, "That's a fucking gorilla."
That's a laryngeal sac.
He's not even convinced there. Yeah. He's not even convinced at the end of the movie. That's the lovely thing about Mason. But my favorite thing about Mason is when he... To reveal how skeptical he is, he has to tell his credentials.
I'm going to show this to someone who can read and write, because you're reading them wrong, that's all there is to it. Because no one's going to tell me you de-differentiated your goddamn genetic structure for 4 goddamn hours and then reconstituted. I'm a professor of endocrinology at the Harvard Medical School. I'm an attending physician at the Peter Bent Brigham Hospital. I'm a contributing editor to the American Journal of Endocrinology, and I'm a fellow and vice president of the Eastern Association of Endocrinologists and president of the Journal Club. And I'm not going to listen to any more of your capitalistic, quantum, friggin' dumb, limbo, mumbo jumbo. I'm going to show these to a radiologist.
He storms off up the stairs, and you're like, bye.
Yeah, and then he comes back like the next scene. He's there like, okay. Because he's a scientist. He wants to find out. Anyway, I love it. I love Mason. He's so good. All right, so here's this film being a Ken Russell film, there's a lot of fun imagery in the film. We don't have the 8-bit dancing snake stuff that we get in Lair of the White Worm, but we do get some pretty cool CGI, like early CGI effects. This is Letterboxd backdrop. What still image from the film would you want printed and framed on your wall?
I don't know if I'd want it on my wall, but I like the image of the 10-eyed goat head on Christ body, on the sort of floating crucifix in the sky moment from the trip. A lot of the trip stuff is really fun. The one at the end when he just is sort of like this kind of loose matter for a little, he almost kind of looks like, it's going to be silly. He almost looks like Heidi Klum on Halloween when she was in that worm costume.
Literally...
You know what I mean? You guys remember that?
Yeah.
Hold on. I'm just going to
remember when she went as a worm, right?
Yeah.
I do not know about this.
Yeah.
How did I miss
What worm? Was it a
Excuse me,
specific
why?
worm? Was it the Dune worm, or was
I
it?
think she was
Heidi
just being a
Klum.
worm.
What?
Just being a worm.
But that's kind of what.
Literally have never seen this in my life.
She's
and
not
now,
Shai Hulud?
She's not Shai Hulud. No.
She's not Shai Hulud. I will never unsee this.
You will be horrified by this and amazed by it for the remainder of the evening.
Be sure to watch her interviews
so
when she's speaking as
In
the
Worm.
In Worm.
In Worm.
She then lays on the ground and does a couple of like little wriggles in the worm costume.
Yeah,
it's quite impressive.
I see some images of this. Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what
Wow.
Jessup kind of looks
Thank
like at
you.
the end of the movie when he's just sort of like this like Play-Doh mass of man. So maybe not that one on my wall, but I do like that Christ
It's
figure
cool.
with like the multi-eyed like goat's head.
That is the most iconic image, I think, from this film.
Mhm.
That is so. I was doing the little internet sleuth thing because I'm not a biblical scholar, but that is a reference to the Book of Revelation. So in the Book of Revelation, chapter 5, verse 6.
Oh wow.
Then it's supposed to be a lamb. I also thought it was a goat, but it's supposed to be a lamb, I guess. I saw a lamb which had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. So there's some sort of demonic lamb that comes out in Book of Revelation, and that's supposed to be what he's seeing.
Do you remember that from your studies?
I recall some of the imagery. It looks familiar. And then the other thing about that too is that it's imagery that is evoked often in the television program Evil, Robert and Michelle King's
Literally was thinking about that watching
horror series that deals a lot with the Catholic Church and about like the coming apocalypse and demonic houses and things like that. But there's often just like creepy guys with goat or lamb's heads with tons of eyes on their heads. So
we're speaking with philosophers. I'm an art historian, or was at one point in my life. And the Salvador Dali imagery that is just like the cave stuff is replete with Salvador Dali imagery. And I don't know if it's explicit or if it's just like Ken Russell being proximate to a lot of like surrealist art and whatever, but Salvador Dali has all these sort of like openings in things that look like vaginal or look like lips and like lips on your face. And I really love that one image of them silhouetted by sunlight, the 3 of them. It's Dr. Jessup, his guide, and then the indigenous person who is about to take him on a journey, walking into a cave, and they're backlit by the sun, and the cave opening looks like something from a Salvador Dali painting. It's it just looks like a pair of lips, and I love that imagery, and all the sand and sort of like rocks teetering on each other is very Dali. I loved all of that stuff, but that one image and then that silhouette of the cave comes back at the very end of the film. When he's in the tank for the last time, it like comes in this sort of like neon blue, like overlay on his face, which I loved.
Yeah, that in during that hallucination, you're talking about the sand when they become sort of sand sculptures and they're slowly blown away. That was really, really cool and evocative, in part because as the sand slowly erodes them, they become more and more abstract. They start to look more and more like an abstract sculpture until eventually you don't see anything. They're just dunes. And that's sort of recalled at the very end when they're these abstract stone-like shapes. I mean, they're like lava or whatever. And they almost... they entwine in a kind of similar sort of pose as they do. So it's sort of recalling it, but it's firmer. They're not being eroded as they were in the sand sculpture. I don't quite know what to make of that, but it is a really compelling visual recall. Also, Laura was an art historian too at one point. So you guys are like, this is hilarious.
We're so in sync. I love it.
Yeah, and now you're host podcasts. Begrudgingly.
Begrudging co-host. I really like, that's funny. So are we all going to land in basically the Mexico sequence? Did you pick one, Justin?
I haven't
already?
picked one, but just go. No, go for it.
I really love Eddie and Emily eating ice cream, wearing formal white clothes with a green screen background of enormous orange poppies. It feels to me like Mary Poppins. Mm-hmm. When they jump into the sidewalk drawing, and because Mary Poppins is a very similar like frilly white dress, and then we've got like the cartoon background. That's what it was evoking that for me. And the poppies, I can't really think about poppies and not think about Wizard of Oz. as well. So yeah, I love, and then there's a number of sequences that go back before she feeds the ice cream to him at some point. But I would pick something from that. I think I also really like the reaction shot that we get when we come out of the trip. So we see the Komodo dragon, who's been like gutted, and then like, but maybe I can't remember if we first see the Henchy guy like having his reaction shot, and then you see the Komodo dragon. But he's like in the foreground, and he's got this look on his face like, oh boy. And then you've got the amazing rocks, the rock formations with the balancing rocks behind it. I'm just going to show Justin so he can see. But it's like such a funny comedic moment where we see the response to like of these people being like, that guy cannot hang. And it's a beautiful image as well, but it's also really funny.
I'll just add one more, and these are all great. I think the scene where he's in the final part where he's in the isolation tank, and then it explodes into light, and then it's flooded. The whole room is flooded, and there's a smoke machine going or something. I just thought that was a really cool image, because I was sort of thinking, like, how did they do this? How would they have flooded this set and then got the smoke swirling in the right kind of way? I thought it was really compelling and just kind of uncanny. I really enjoyed that sequence. But okay, so we do this thing on this podcast called Fitz and Frizz, which is brought to you by Mugatu.
I invented the piano key necktie! I invented it! What have you done, Derek?
Where we highlight our favorite fashion-forward moments. Now, maybe we could, in this case, just put it as like, what outfit from the film would you want? Because there's a lot of cool outfits in this movie. It's not really a fashion movie, but still there are some pretty cool outfits. I'm curious, which one jumped out at you? Which one would you want to take home and wear?
Me first?
Yeah, you had one.
Aaron's going first. You're going first, Aaron.
I'll go first because Carly is the fashionista of the two of us. There is a channel in our Discord server called Carly's Fashion Corner, which is also sometimes a segment on our show. So she'll have a lot to say about the clothes.
I did not. This was not some sort of like ego trip for me. It was requested.
I made it. It was requested by our devoted fans, and I made the channel and said, hey, not to burden you with one more thing, but like, this is your channel now and people want to see you in here. So by any means, there are lots of great like late 70s or early 80s like fits in here, but the one immediately that I called out and remarked on was the like chambray shirt that Hurt has on at one point that has like the embroidered like floral thing, almost like tropical flowers or something on it. He's very conservatively dressed for most of the rest of the movie, and he looks great, but like corduroy blazers and things like that. But I saw that and I looked over at Carly and said, I desperately need that shirt. That's if of all the items in this film, like that's the one that I need to find something proximate to.
I would say Emily's safari outfit.
Yeah.
I mean, she's straight up. She's like from the Wild Thornberries. And she's in shoes that are very near and dear to me that have been around for ages. Dr. Scholl's sandals. And she's wearing them with safari socks and like full on, and she's unpacking crates and shit. Like it's so literal. I love that outfit. It's perfect.
Are you going safari outfit?
I mean, I also love the Wild Thornberries. That's perfect. I was trying to figure out what it was reminding me of, and I was like, man with a yellow hat and Curious George. But then I looked it up. It's not that. You're right. It's Wild Thornberries. That's what it looks like. When Emily is taking Eddie home after he's gone wild on a zoo, they're in the back of a taxi, like after she got him from jail. And she has a very lovely jewel-colored crocheted shacket, I would say, that she's wearing. I don't know what was on beneath it because it's just like a dark scene where she's sort of like he's leaning on her in the back of the cab. But I love that crocheted shacket.
I was also going to say the corduroy jackets. I mean, that's like what I always envisioned of as a professor. And now that I am one, I don't. I just wear like
you
hoodies
wear
and
t-shirts
stuff.
like a schlub.
I know. I look like a total schlub. But the joke one is the caveman outfit.
Oh
yeah.
To be fair, right? Full body hair all over, just like running around completely naked.
And you have to jump on cars if you wear it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And jump over the fence and like attack a lion or a tiger. I don't know.
Follow the wild dogs.
I want to debut a new segment here, which is called Academics Be Like, which is a segment where we explore the depiction of academia in film and whether or not it's accurate. And the answer for this is easy. It is accurate.
So accurate.
It is very accurate. The research is total bullshit, and none of this makes any sense. And he would, there's actual guidelines that you have to pass to do research like this, and he would not pass any of them.
Well,
but
his point was, he's like, we're not gonna like put in for a grant. We're just bootstrapping it.
It's true, right. But you can't. If you still have to pass IRB.
Can you be unethical when it's just your own body?
Yes, there's rules for all this stuff. But the way they talk, as we've already mentioned, and in one example of this is the dinner scene. And if you go and look at the script, it's hilarious. The script is so funny. It is literally just blocks of text that are not connected to any. Neither of the characters are connecting to one another. It's just like large block of text, and then next character, large block of completely unrelated text, and then and it's just like, okay, so there's basically each of them is just ranting about their current research to whoever is next to them in the scene, that's basically what being at an academic conference is like. So yeah, perfectly accurate.
As a matter of fact, Eduardo, my year in India was disappointing. No matter how you slice it, yoga is still a state-specific technology operating in the service of an a priori belief system. How much
we scientists have a moral obligation to the public as well as to our own research.
It's never occurred to baboons that they could shorten that time to 5 minutes if they used a stick. Originally, man was just another savanna living primate like the baboon.
What dignifies the yogic practices is that the belief system itself is not truly religious. There is no Buddhist God, per se. It is the self, the individual mind that contains immortality and ultimate truth.
What the hell is not religious about that? You've simply replaced God with the original self.
Yes, but we've localized it, at least to know where the self is. It's in our own minds. It's a form of human energy. Our atoms are 6 billion years old. We've got 6 billion years of memory in our minds.
Atoms are older than that.
Memory is energy. It doesn't disappear. It's still in there. That's a physiological pathway to our earlier consciousnesses. There has to be, and I'm telling you, it's in the goddamn limbic system.
Jesse, you're a wacko thing, Eduardo.
What's wacko about it, Mason? I'm a man in search of his true self. How artifically American can you get? Everybody's looking for their true selves. We're all trying to fulfill ourselves, understand ourselves, get in touch with ourselves, face the reality of ourselves.
Can I ask a question about the world of academia as you all have experienced it?
Yes.
Are there as many jars of yellow mustard just lying around as there are in this film? And if so, is someone in your cohort perpetually applying it to sandwich bread and then leaving those sandwiches resting on the bedspread?
I did not notice any of this. That's incredible.
God, mustard is going to stain so bad. Don't put it on the bedspread.
There's at both the initial party where he meets Emily at Arthur's place.
Yeah, he's looking for the mustard.
Yeah, he's making what looks like just a mustard and Swiss cheese sandwich, which, bless him, I'm sure that tastes delicious. Yeah. He also then is making a sandwich when they are at Jessup and Emily's apartment when he's learning about their impending divorce. And he goes to speak with Jessup. And when he does, he sits down on the bed while he's kind of standing in the corner when that, scene comes up where he's talking about, the distinction between the pain we cause each other versus the pain we inflict on ourselves. And he just sets his sandwich that has one bite taken out of it just on the bed. And I maybe it's because Carly has instilled a profound sense of neatness into my life. But I saw that and I had a momentary conniption where I was like, this is not acceptable behavior in someone else's home.
Yeah.
Pick up the
no. I think sometimes really brilliant people do not have acceptable behavior in that way.
So okay.
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have many stories like this. So I would never do this in a million years because that bed is dirty and I don't want to die of whatever diseases are on that bed. I'll tell you one funny story. A friend of mine checked out a book from the library and he was thumbing through the book and he found a check, an uncashed check for some amount of money written out to his friend, his grad student cohort. He was like, hey, here's your check that you were using as a bookmark that you put in and returned the book to the library.
Luckily, only 4 people checked that book out, and they all know
2
each other.
people checked out the book. It was him and the other guy. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, maniacs.
It is very common.
Maniacs, lovable maniacs. I will say, though, about food and philosophers, is also like, if you have 15 philosophers, you also have like 15 different food restrictions, preferences, like ethical beliefs. And so like food can get very complicated. And a group of philosophers who think very hard about, what is ethical to put in their bodies.
It's a lot of vegans.
Yeah.
The other thing this movie gets right about academics is academics love to complain about our incredibly charmed lives. So
true.
in the film, Jessup, when he's explaining why he's divorcing his wife Emily, he's saying he's explaining my life sucks right now. Even though he's a full professor at the Harvard Medical School, his life is basically as good as it's going to get. He could just sit around and do nothing for the rest of his life. He'll be perfectly fine. He's like,
God's sake, Arthur, is that how you imagine me? A respected and admired figure? A devoted father, a loving husband? Well, I've also published nearly 2 papers a year for the last 7 years, and not a fundamental piece of work in the lot. I sit around the living rooms of other young married faculty members talking infantile masturbation, who's sucking up to the head of the department, whose tenure is hanging by a thread. Emily's quite content to go on with this life. She insists she's in love with me, whatever that is. What she means is she prefers the senseless pain we inflict on each other to the pain we would otherwise inflict on ourselves. But I'm not afraid of that solitary pain. In fact, if I don't strip myself of all this clatter and clutter and ridiculous ritual, I shall go out of my fucking mind. Does that answer your question, Earth?
What question was that?
You asked me why I was getting divorced.
Oh, listen, it's your life. I'm sorry I even asked.
I also have to ask you if the I know this was done for sort of like expediency for the plot, and Ken Russell was like, I don't want to fucking hear this garbage, just talk over each other. But I also would have to imagine that that's true to that happens,
yes.
right? Do you have just people ranting over each other at
yes
at gatherings of academics?
Yes. So okay, totally yes. You have people yelling at each other, so to speak. I mean, disagreeing very strongly. The use of shorthand, so the kind of quick, being able to move quickly in the conversation, that totally happens because naturally we're all presupposing a huge amount of background, so we could just move fast through the debate. But it does occasionally happen in really obtrusive and not appropriate ways. So sometimes people will take over someone else's talk by raising their hand and then ranting at the speaker for 10 minutes. And if there isn't a good moderator, this could get really out of hand. And it does happen periodically because the moderator is often a graduate student. And then the person who's doing the ranting, who's not the speaker, is
like a famous,
super famous professor.
Yeah.
And the grad student is like, I'm not going to jeopardize my career now. So I'm just going to let this happen. And then the speaker, sometimes they're a grad student, they're just getting berated by a professor. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen, and it is.
You make it sound really crazy. I have stepped into a few conferences here and there. I think it's mostly very collegial, and everybody takes turns.
It's
talking.
become a lot better. But Laura's also been to the spiciest of all conferences.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. But yeah, it actually just reminded me. Justin's a ranter, a monologuer, as I say, and so is our son. And I don't know if it's a learned behavior or a genetic thing, but the number of times that I'm just sitting in the middle and you guys are ranting at the same time about totally different things is like a daily occurrence.
This is true. This does happen. Yes,
I love the idea of the two of you having a scene like Mason and Arthur do in the bathroom when they're literally just
shouting
at each other, totally not. Neither one is having what the other is saying, and it's just. I actually love that scene, by the way, when they are directly talking over each other.
I think it's just great.
It's compelling, really good.
And it feels real.
It does.
We watch everything here at home with the closed captioning on because we can't hear anything without our subtitles. And I was so thankful for them, frankly. I had a moment where we were watching the film and I was like, I don't know how anyone parses any of this out without these captions. And then I kind of realized, that's sort of the point. And then I started having more fun with it. But
yeah, totally. So, okay, last thing. Well, actually, I want to do a trivia round. So, last thing, though, before we get to that, who needs to see this film? Does anybody need to see this film?
Great question.
Like, why not? You know, my answer is one that comes up a lot in like our show and our conversations, which is like any movie that is, especially in today's landscape, no matter what year it's from, if I come across a film where like a guy or a lady is trying something and they are like intent on whatever project they are putting forth and they want to make you think and feel things, I mean, there's a shortage of that these days. So I kind of feel like, you know, and no one needs to see this film, but it's like, of all the things you could see, like if you're going to stumble across it, I would say watch this before you go see like, you know, the next Marvel movie. And that's time and a place for Marvel movies. Like I don't hate them, but I do appreciate filmmakers and actors in films that are trying something and like swinging for the fences. I think that's always going to make better art, even when the art isn't great.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it does feel like it's coming from a very personal place with Ken Russell and presumably Patty Chayefsky as well. I mean, my answer to this is potential wives of academics might wanna check this one out before they jump in.
I was wondering about. I felt like it was too sassy
like
for
if
me.
you
to
had
say.
seen it before you dated me, you might have had second thoughts.
No.
You're like, are you doing any defamation tank stuff? Do we have?
Justin's very cautious with his body, so I wasn't so concerned about that. But we call it the philosophy hole. Yeah. Your philosophy holes were deeper and wider when I first met you.
Yeah,
actually.
Pre-tenure it was a difference.
Yeah. That would just like be like, Just can only think about one thing right now. He's like in the middle of a problem. He's working it out. He's like, he wakes up in the middle of the night and writes down notes. And like, I can't have a conversation about dinner with him because like, it's just too hard. Or like you just kind of, when we didn't live together and you were in the dorm, you just sort of disappear for a while. And at first, like I found that very strange, and then I got used to it pretty quickly. And then we would just have the shorthand that you're in a philosophy hole. I'll see you when you can take yourself out.
Eventually, you just give up whatever I was working on,
or solve it.
Yeah.
You know, that happens too. But it's just it's a different rhythm, maybe. And it's not like that's an academic thing. That's just like an obsessive, passionate thing.
And again, like you, Aaron, I resonated. I mean, the character of Jessup resonated me partly because of the obsessiveness. I mean, he's a little bit misguided in terms of which thing he's obsessing over, but he is that kind of pull to discover and to get to the bottom of something, that itch that you feel like, I just scratched something and I pulled back a little bit and I want to rip the whole thing off. That is the feeling that drives like a lot of academics, maybe all academics. And we're sort of fortunate enough to be able to have the time to be able to like do that uncovering. And but as a result, it is, you know, it's like a drug almost. I mean, it's crazy how like you just that thrill of discovery and uncovering is kind of unmatched in some ways.
Or this despair of it not working out, or like or hitting your head against the wall.
More likely it doesn't work out.
And that's also like all consuming as well.
Yeah.
Guys, so we want to end with the trivia round now. So this is, you all are playing together. You're on one team, and I have 4 questions for you that I've prepared. Now, this film was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. Do you know what Academy Awards they were?
We've got to be looking at technical awards.
Yeah, it's got to be technical.
I mean, given what the film is.
And it's 1980.
And it's 1980.
Like they were doing a ton of stuff.
I'm just trying to remember at this point, though, if there were 2 different sound awards yet, sound editing and sound mixing. We could be looking at editing as well. We could be looking at visual effects.
Yeah.
If that was on
makeup,
the docket, makeup.
Yeah. That's actually, maybe it's visual effects. I was also thinking like, I don't know how we feel about this being an adaptation, but it is an adaptation, right? So I'm wondering if it was maybe nominated for adapted screenplay, but
this could be one of the Chayefsky 4 well, he won 4 times, but
I feel like this wouldn't be.
I would be surprised if it was.
Yeah.
Sound is one of them.
Okay.
And there is only a category called sound.
Yes.
So I
Sound.
think we have
That's
not
what I
split it in two of
Great.
editing and mixing.
Air horn
What
sounds.
is the other one? Hasn't been mentioned yet.
We even said is visual effects that's
It's not visual effects.
not a visual. That's not
Yeah.
even like
I
a
was
category?
surprised by this when I saw this. but
Okay.
It didn't stand out to me, but I'd have to go back and ponder
Okay.
it.
Did William Hurt get a Best Actor nominee?
No,
No, that would be
No.
awesome though.
Score.
Score. It was best original score nomination. It didn't win.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. They
Okay.
did give a
John-
title card for the score early on.
Okay. John
Like, so-
Coriglano. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Okay, whatever.
Interesting.
Okay, so the next one this is less about the film, but more about the broader thing. So the film explores the concept of genetic memory,
Mm-hmm.
which also plays a role in what famous science fiction book?
Oh no.
Oh boy.
All right, I'll give you a clue. This book has recently been adapted into a movie.
Okay. Is there genetic memory in Dune?
It is Dune.
Oh.
I was going
It
to
is
say it
Dune.
is in Dune. Yeah. Okay.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Dune or read the book.
While also, consuming near lethal psychedelics
Yes.
from
Right.
from a
Oh,
worm.
also the Bene Gesserit.
The Bene Gesserit, exactly.
Of course.
When you
of
take
course.
the water
Alia,
of life,
the
you
abomination,
access all of the genetic memories.
has all the
Yeah.
memories of all the Bene Gesserit in her little tiny body.
Okay.
Of course.
So next
How could
question.
I forget?
So this was William Hurt's first film. It was also apparently Drew Barrymore's first film. But anyway, first is a two-parter. On the IMDb known for page, there's 4 movies that they're known for. Okay. So is this one of the films he's known for? True or false? That's the first question.
Okay.
William Hurt?
He's done a lot of movies.
He has done a lot of movies.
Would he be known for this film?
My guess would be that 2 of them are broadcast news, of course. And despite his short amount of screen time, David Cronenberg's A History of Violence because he was nominated for an Oscar for that performance.
So you're doing Process of Elimination.
I'm trying to think of what else it could be. The Village, maybe, but that seems unlikely. Until the End of the World, the Wim Wenders film, but that one also seems like kind of an outlier, like in Altered States.
Well, gang, who's
Body Heat,
deciding
Big Chill.
who's
Big
known
Chill.
Yeah, who's
for?
deciding? The
have
IMDb
no
ones are
idea.
always a little weird
Yeah, I
too.
have
The
no
known
idea.
fors are funky. So
Yeah.
who's to say?
I'm locking
gonna,
in yes.
Okay.
Aaron's
Okay.
locking in yes, and the answer is yes.
What?
And Aaron, now
I would
you've-
not have said
You've
yes.
already
Thank you, Aaron.
named 2 of the other 3. So it's
Okay.
this movie, A History of Violence,
Uh-huh.
Broadcast News, and
Uh-huh.
what other film? It has not yet been mentioned.
Okay, so it wasn't Big Chill or Body Heat.
Yeah.
Wasn't the early stuff. Is it a Marvel movie? Because he's very briefly in Marvel movies, isn't he? He's in one of them, I thought.
Yeah,
like
he plays the Sam Elliott character in the later Hulk film.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but it's not that.
Not that.
Just because a lot of people have seen those, I suppose.
Right,
It's not
right.
that, no.
Mm-hmm.
This one, I haven't seen this movie, so I was like, okay, I guess I don't know.
I'm stumped.
I mean, it's a sci-fi movie.
Oh.
A sci-fi movie.
Yeah, I don't know if that
Is it
helps.
older William Hurt or younger William Hurt?
I think. Okay, if I
Middle
lead
William
you
Hurt.
I don't want to lead you astray, but I think this would fall in the purview of your podcast. This movie, I think.
Interesting.
Okay.
I think-
Okay.
Or maybe
Is it Dark City?
No. So maybe I did lead you astray. I'm not sure. It was Lost in Space. Is that a 90s movie?
Oh, yeah, it is. It's 1998.
Yeah.
Lost in
Yeah.
Lost in
Space of all of
Space.
these. I guess because that was like it was a big Disney production. Like they really wanted that to be like a tentpole kind of franchise,
But,
and it just totally bombed.
That's okay. Yeah. Of all the movies he's done.
Interesting. That's
Huh.
wild.
I know.
Okay.
That's a strange. I was very surprised by this top 4. But
We
your
are winning,
justification
for the record.
You are
Thanks-
winning.
Thanks
Oh, you
to
are winning.
Laura and Aaron. I just want to point that out. We are winning the trivia.
Beautiful.
Now this one is the hardest one.
Oh no. Okay.
Okay, so we have discussed a movie on this podcast. Now, you guys might want to pull up the cowspod.com website to look, just to
list of
glance
features.
through the featured movies we've covered. So we've seen Blair Brown, the woman who plays Emily, in a movie discussed on this podcast before. I was surprised to learn this.
Yeah. And I was just looking her up yesterday too, and I did not see that.
She doesn't have a very long movie credits list, so it's not like.
Yeah.
But I was surprised. But yeah.
But I think she was in a TV show like recently when she was older. So that was.
Yeah. So so the question is, what movie that we've discussed on this podcast? There's only 120 something of them to look through. By the way, just for Aaron and Carly, you don't have to scroll that far.
Okay,
you won't have to really scroll.
I'm gonna look at.
Interesting.
I don't even know what we've talked about.
Yeah, Laura's scrolling. Laura's like, I don't even know what we've covered.
What's the name of our website?
My random guess would be that she plays Johnny Rico's mother in Starship Troopers, but I have no idea.
Oh, that would be really interesting.
Oh,
it is
wow,
not that.
wow.
It is not that, but that's great. Yeah. So, Laura, do you have a guess, or do you just?
I still have to pull up.
Laura's looking up the website.
I've never been on this website. It looks great.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
I'm only half kidding.
Don't scroll that far, Laura. It's not. You don't have to go far that back. So you don't have to go back that far. Yeah, I was surprised. I was honestly surprised. I just had not put this together.
Okay.
How long has she been acting?
Since at least 1980.
Yeah.
I've gone too far.
Stumped.
I've gone too far. I'm totally
The
stumped.
answer is Dogville. She plays Chloe Sevigny's mom, Mrs. Henson.
Oh wow.
my gosh.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, that would have been
never guessed that.
That would have been a good guess because everyone's in that movie.
That's
so.
true.
It's true. It's a big cast. It is.
Huge cast.
Wow. I was like looking past, I was like really thinking like, could she possibly been in Hot Tub Time Machine? I was not thinking Dogville at all.
No, I mean,
okay.
That was the impossible question because it truly, I was like,
That's
well,
cool. I loved her in
idea.
this. I also like that her hair is fluffy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my hair is fluffy too, and I am always battling it. But I wish I lived in the 80s and then I could just let my hair be fluffy.
Yeah, tame the mane.
No, I love that you're bringing this up, Laura, because I said to Aaron at one point, I was like, I love that they just like movies, you know, a while ago, just like let people look like people. Like she's beautiful in this movie, but she's got like, you know, she's got like her smile lines and her teeth are like kind of like she looks like a person. And I was like, I was just so taken by her face and her hair and her body, everything about her.
Yeah, she was just like sort of effortlessly beautiful. She didn't look done up.
Totally.
She just looked like she looked like a stunner who's just really smart and doesn't have time to, you know, get a full workup all the time, but she still does a good blowout, honestly. Like her hair is she's
Carly and Aaron, thank you so much for being here. And tell the listeners at home where they can listen to you guys on Hit Factory and find you guys on social media.
Sure thing. We host a podcast called Hit Factory about the films of the 1990s, their politics, everything sort of adjacent to that. We are playing wherever you stream your podcasts. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/hitfactorypod, where we do bonus episodes and biweekly content there. And you can follow along with the show at Hit Factory Pod. That's on Twitter, which I run, Instagram, which Carly runs, and Blue Sky, which neither of us run and have neglected for months now because, you know, why would we be there? But that's us, Hit Factory Pod, pretty much around all the socials and Hit Factory Podcast, wherever you like to stream them.
What's coming up for you guys next?
We are releasing this week an episode on Cruel Intentions with the People's Joker filmmaker Vera Drew, friend of the show who we adore. If you haven't seen the movie, Run, Don't Walk. It's hilarious. It's one of the funniest things we've seen in some time, and also incredibly moving. After that, it is really TBD. We kind of fly by the seat of our pants a little bit. I can tease that we've got like one item on the books already locked in. We will be doing a rather big, in terms of runtime and just popularity, political film of the 90s in the lead up to the 2024 election, the first week of November. It will probably be us talking about the presidency in general and also just the chaos of this year's election cycle a little bit as a means of catharsis for all of us involved. But that'll be coming up in the near future as well. So be on the lookout.
That sounds great. Is it where you do a JFK? What are you guys going to do?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's a couple of good presidential flicks. 2 of them, in fact, by that director, Oliver Stone.
Yes.
So who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows what it could be?
Very exciting.
Oh my gosh.
Very exciting. Laura's a big JFK fan, so she's
Yes.
Likewise.
Love that movie.
And we are at CowsPod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspod.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. We are covering in 2 weeks Alien Romulus, the new what's his name? Fede Alvarez alien movie with Scout Tafoya. So we'll see you there in 2 weeks. Thanks, guys. Bye.